pushes the earliest smelting in California to something Peter Lassen was doing. The creek has a lot of black sand in it. The black sand is basically iron ore related. That's what they would be melting down to get their iron source. So that was kind of one of the things they would need out here, was a source of iron. The Vina area here was the terminus of the Lassen Trail. Just by convenience, it's where Peter Lassen lived. The whole trail itself was almost an accident, but this is where it ended up. So we're south-ish of where this adobe was. There was some historic structures here. We had photos, an old, I think it was a sketch someone made of some structures off behind us. We went out there a couple years ago and a ridiculous amount of subsurface metal. They did a quick dig on one of the larger pieces and it turned out to be the top of a barrel. So we came out a couple years ago and we excavated around the barrel. And we went down almost a meter. We found basically the floor of a structure. It was all disintegrated, crumbled apart. We think the whole area had been bulldozed at some point. We found conclusive evidence, pretty conclusive. There was a smelter there. The artifacts we were finding were smelter related. We confirmed this with the Knights Foundry. They're an active foundry and they are producing about the same type of artifacts now that we're finding in the hole over there. Pretty fascinating because it pushes the earliest smelting in California to something Peter Lassen was doing, which is totally something he would have engaged in since he liked to do a lot of waterworking activity. So we'd look for what you might expect to find where a bunch of buildings and people were living at some point. We know just from circumstantial evidence, which is to say that giant pile of scrap over there, that the whole area was probably bulldozed at some point when they turned it into orchard, probably during the Stanford era. So what we would expect to find is the stuff that was too small for them to worry about or care about, stuff that could be easily buried when they were tearing the land up to make the orchard. The scrap pile was an exploded boiler, it's what it looked like. A bunch of barrel bands from like flour or probably flour type barrels, other bits of largish scrap, bits of concrete. So my theory was that it had been an adobe floor and they reinforced it or covered it with concrete at some point, and the concrete had a lot of the spatter from the cast iron forging on it. Smallish artifacts. The smallest thing we found was 1851 was a rivet from a pair of pants, Levi's pants. We actually had someone from the company confirm that for us. They said it was decently old, that era, about that era. So puts the site about the age we want it to be too. Peter Lassen aged.
Lassen developed some canals. They're to my left, to the west here. Lassen first comes here in the spring of 1844. He's half on the Vina Plains, half not, on the north side of Deer Creek. And then around 1847, he comes over to the south side. These canals were 528 feet apart, a tenth of a mile, and this was the basis of his town of Benton. They had cross canals, so each city block had running water. And this was built before the gold rush. This man had a lot of vision before going back to Missouri to draw people here to his already made town. The 528 feet is 1/10 of a mile. A mile is 5,280 feet. These canals were exactly 528 feet apart. These canals were set at 0.001% of grade. This needed, it's very flat. The depression is the canal that connected all four of these canals that were 528 feet apart, and it allowed water to come in at either end. This end supplied water from one canal system, and water from the other end supplied water from the other canal system. He could bring water to bear on the town of Benton or the mill down on the Sacramento River. He built 23 miles of canals here on Rancho Bosquejo based on the Danish plan of canals, which is straight runs with angular corners, which are originally have Roman attributes. He built 10 miles at Cosumnes River for Jared Sheldon. The other Benton City is on a different canal system. It fed water to his 1844 adobe, his early small 26-inch grist mill, and then later the 1850 town of Benton City. It's 3 foot wide. It has the reservoir behind the Deer Creek Dam, and it has 2 other reservoirs on its run. One to test mill components and another one to do the mill site. That reservoir today is now a vineyard, and it is right next to the vineyard building at New Clairvaux Abbey, where you can come and get a bottle of wine anytime. Feeder canals that were coming in were on the Danish model of straight lines with angular corners. He was unyielding in this. If there was a rock outcropping, he went through the rock. He didn't go around it, even though he could do it with grade. He followed these straight angular canals of Roman attributes. These canals carry twice as much water as a curvy canal that follows the terrain. We're standing next to the Abbey New Clairvaux's new chapel, and if you come here and you walk down the sidewalk to the east side of the chapel, you'll see that you're in a depression, and the depression continues to the south. This is the Manifold Canal that connected 4 canals that Lassen built in 1847. The depression is the canal that connected all 4 of these canals that were 528 feet apart, and it allowed water to come in at either end. This end supplied water from one canal system, and water from the other end supplied water from the other canal system. He could bring water to bear on the town of Benton or the mill down on the Sacramento River. In 1850, a fellow named J. Goldsboro Bruff came through here, made a very detailed account of his travels. I've used those travels to find various sites. And then I've reverse engineered those back to the Lassen Rancho over here. And there's a wonderful drawing of that rancho. There's about 8 adobe buildings. There's a cute little skunk hopping along. Lassen standing in the doorway of the adobe in the front. And Goldsboro Bruff's little pup tent, which has his initials on it, is right on the shore of a little reservoir that Lassen built over here. Trading post at Greenville. It's a small little trading post. He's got a little 20-acre garden. He's running a mill in his garden on these springs, and yet he still runs a little canal over to a group of Indian pit houses and makes sure they have water right to their back door. So he's living alone, essentially, maybe with a few other guys, but he's living alone before the gold rush out here, and he is well liked by the Indians. He is well respected. In Lassen County, up at Ropes Fort, he is sent at least 2 times that I can remember to Winnemucca over to Pyramid Lake to sue for peace between the pioneers of the Honey Lake region and calm everything down. He was respected by the Indians and the Europeans. First story that comes to mind is Lassen at the Cosumnes River south of Sacramento. He's living a stone's throw away from a major Indian village. He would go out, hunt deer, bring the deer back, hand it to the Indians, and then they would just hand him the steaks and keep the rest of the carcass. He was essentially very well respected by the Indians. He built a canal for Jared Sheldon from Rancho Tehama down to Slough House. That's 10 miles. And it hits every Indian village, supplies water to every Indian village along the way. Here in Tehama County at his Rancho Bosquejo, he does the same thing. All of his canals go out, they come back in, and they go to every major village. There are 3 major villages here, the Riso, the Oak Quail, and the Sahichi. He hits every one of those villages, even though the dams are 1.5 miles that way. The village is 3 miles that way.